This video is about various carbon fluxes within the Earth's carbon cycle, as the cycle plays a crucial role in maintaining the carbon balance in the environment. The topics in this key concepts video are the interconnectedness of photosynthesis and respiration, carbon fluxes in the carbon cycle, combustion, and the Keeling curve. These key concepts are some of the most important topics covered in the IB biology course. Carbon continually moves through the environment in fluxes. Carbon flux refers to the movement or transfer of carbon atoms between different reservoirs or pools within the Earth's carbon cycle. The carbon reservoirs include land, oceans, atmosphere, and living things. Carbon fluxes occur through various pathways, include the processes of photosynthesis and respiration, as well as other processes like decomposition, combustion, and carbon sequestration. The process of photosynthesis and respiration are interconnected and play a crucial role in maintaining the balance of gases in the atmosphere. Photosynthesis, carried out by plants and other photosynthetic organisms, convert carbon dioxide and water into glucose and oxygen, using sunlight as the energy source. Meanwhile, respiration, performed by all living organisms, including plants, breaks down glucose, releases carbon dioxide and water, while capturing energy for cell metabolism as ATP. As the products of one process are the reactants of the other, the processes of photosynthesis and respiration work in tandem to ensure atmospheric oxygen and carbon dioxide levels remain relatively stable. The flux of carbon via photosynthesis and respiration occurs on a global scale. Here we can see that the amount of carbon moved between the atmosphere and biosphere by photosynthesis is roughly estimated to account for 29% of the carbon transferred to and from the atmosphere, while respiration accounts for 30%. The next largest fluxes occur between the atmosphere and ocean, while fossil fuels accounts for 2%. There are countless organisms contributing to the balance of carbon in the atmosphere, resulting in large fluxes between autotrophs and heterotrophs, and are responsible for enormous amounts of carbon movement. Photosynthesis absorbs carbon dioxide, while respiration releases it, creating a delicate equilibrium that sustains life as we know it. Now that we have looked at how carbon is incorporated into living tissue through photosynthesis and released through respiration, let's consider the different pathways carbon can take while cycling through the ecosystem. Before we focus on carbon, however, it's worth noting that carbon is not the only element that cycles in the ecosystem. In fact, all the atoms that make up organic tissues have been cycling in and out of ecosystems since life first began on Earth. Elements like nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus cycle through living organisms and the environment. As you can see in this image, nitrogen cycles through living organisms through processes such as feeding on producers and ammonification in the soil by bacteria. Decomposers such as bacteria are responsible for returning most of these nutrients to the soil or atmosphere, freeing them for plants to uptake them again. Plants often absorb more carbon through photosynthesis than they release through respiration. A sink is an organism in an ecosystem that absorbs more carbon than it releases. Plants act as a sink when more carbon dioxide is stored than released. When plants grow and build tissues, carbon dioxide is removed from the atmosphere. As plants reach maturity and their growth slows, their net absorption of carbon dioxide decreases. Additionally, heterotrophs, which rely on consuming organic matter, are always sources of carbon dioxide, as they respire and do not photosynthesize. A source is an organism that releases more carbon dioxide than it absorbs. During the process of decomposition or combustion, plants and other organisms are sources of carbon dioxide. Occasionally, plants, animals, and other organisms do not completely undergo decomposition. The organism may, for instance, be submerged in a marsh or bog that is a hostile environment for aerobic decomposers. With little oxygen or nutrients available in the water, high acidity, and low temperatures, it becomes difficult for aerobic decomposers to survive in that environment. As a result, there's a large amount of biomass that does not decompose and results in partially decomposed plant material formed over thousands of years called peat. The large amount of undecomposed biomass makes peat a significant source of energy and takes the role of a carbon sink, Because peat stores so much carbon with little decomposition releasing carbon, it's an extremely efficient carbon sink relative to forests. Limited decomposition can occur in waterlogged, oxygen-poor, and acidic conditions by anaerobic bacteria who do not use oxygen to break down organic molecules. Anaerobic bacteria known as methanogens use hydrogen to break down organic molecules and form methane as a byproduct. These methanogenic bacteria exist in both marshes and swamplands, as well as the digestive tracts of animals. Methane is a greenhouse gas and therefore contributes to global warming. Peat formation is the first step in forming coal. If peat is continually covered in sediment through compaction, high temperatures and pressures, and through millions of years of formation, peat will slowly transform into coal. Similar to coal formation, oil is formed through burial of organic matter and long-term geologic processes occurring over millions of years. However, in oil formation, the carbon source comes from the burial of algae and plankton in ocean or marine environments. Now let's examine the impact of combustion on the carbon cycle. Combustion of organic matter releases a lot of light and heat energy, as there's a relatively large amount of energy stored in the biomolecules making up organic tissues. Natural events like lightning strikes and forest fires release carbon dioxide into the atmosphere through the process of combustion. When forest fires occur naturally, the fires are usually followed by a relatively rapid growth and reforestation through secondary succession. The carbon released during the fire is rapidly absorbed by vegetation during regrowth, creating a renewing source and sink balance. Deforestation is practiced globally to make room for cattle, farming, or urban development, and this is often achieved through burning. The combustion of forest biomass is generally not followed by a regrowth phase. Such examples of human activities increasing combustion rates intensifies the release of carbon from its source with very little or no transfer of carbon to a sink. In addition, reduction in plant biomass through deforestation reduces the availability of biomass for carbon storage, further enhancing the negative impact humans have on the carbon cycle. Combustion of fossil fuels plays a significant role in the carbon cycle. Fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas are non-renewable organic resources that store ancient carbon. Their combustion releases large amounts of carbon dioxide from their source, contributing to the enhanced greenhouse effect in global warming. These fossil fuels that have formed over millions of years are quickly released from sinks such as combustion to power cars and coal power plants. Because there is an imbalance between the release of carbon from carbon sources and uptake of carbon into storage via carbon sinks, this leads to a significant increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide, exacerbating climate change. In contrast, use of renewable organic fuels, such as wood and peat, offer a sustainable alternative source of energy to fossil fuels and coal. Trees, crops, and such forms of biomass can be planted to replenish used sources of fuel. Peat can reform if managed properly. As long as combustion and reformation of fuel sources are maintained, the sources and sinks are balanced. This avoids a net release of atmospheric carbon dioxide. The Keeling curve is a daily measurement of atmospheric carbon dioxide measured by the Scripps Institute of Oceanography and taken from Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii. Many of the concepts we've looked at in this section are explained by this data. Pause the video and see if you can identify two trends and use the concepts that we've learned to explain them. The trend in the data is a steady increase in atmospheric carbon dioxide since measurements began in 1958. This is seen by a positive slope showing the rise in carbon dioxide levels from approximately 315 parts per million in 1960 to 415 parts per million in 2023. Such increasing levels of carbon dioxide are a result of enhanced carbon dioxide release into the atmosphere from continual combustion of fossil fuels. The upward slope is a result of imbalance in the storage and release of carbon from sources and sinks. Notice too that there are steady fluctuations in the curve. Let's look more closely at that. Each rise is followed by an almost equal decrease in carbon dioxide over the course of a year. It's followed by another almost equal increase in carbon dioxide, and the pattern repeats. Looking at each year, we can see there's a steady rise in the early months of winter in the northern hemisphere when plant leaves have dropped, thereby reducing carbon dioxide uptake and storage of carbon. Meanwhile, organisms continue to respire and release carbon dioxide. This is followed by a drop in carbon dioxide levels when plant growth during the summer in the northern hemisphere accelerates and carbon dioxide is taken up for photosynthesis and stored in biomass. Carbon dioxide levels released from respiration is lower than that of carbon dioxide uptake for photosynthesis. In this video, we looked at how photosynthesis and respiration are cyclic, as the products of one process are the reactants of the other. We saw how carbon and other nutrients cycle through the ecosystem and are introduced to living organisms through autotrophs and released from biomass by decomposers. We looked at how carbon fluxes through sources and sinks through photosynthesis and respiration, as well as feeding and combustion. We compared sources of fuel by their renewability and their contribution to global warming. Finally, we saw how the Keeling curve's data shows an accumulation of atmospheric carbon dioxide levels over decades, while taking into account seasonal fluctuations.